It's Sunday morning, and at our church, a couple walks out on the platform for me to interview. The woman is soulful and lively-hearted. In her late 50s, she is plagued by arthritis, so she leans on the arm of a strong young man with quiet dignity. Her name is Mary. His name is O'Shea. In 1993, Mary's son, her only son, was killed during an argument at a party. O'Shea is the man who killed Mary's son. Today, Mary and O'Shea lived next door to each other. Forgiveness is not a natural act. Jesus was citing conventional wisdom when he said, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes His sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." Now, in that day, people did know, they understood that you are to love your friends but hurt your enemies. But here's the deal. Anger, hurt, bitterness, resentment, they're a huge force in life, and nobody gets to float above them. People sometimes wonder, is it possible to forgive when the other person is not repentant? And you might distinguish between forgiveness as letting go of my right to hurt you back, and then reconciliation, which requires the sincere intentions of both parties. I am not commanded to pretend to trust somebody who is untrustworthy, but underneath all that is the command to love. I'm called to love the repentant person who has hurt me, and I'm also called to love the unrepentant person. And all this comes from this man, Jesus. One day, Jesus kind of shocked his followers. It was early in his ministry. Things are going pretty well. He's drawn a crowd so large that he has to get into a boat so that the crowd will be able to listen to him. And that evening, he says to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. Now that's the phrase, the other side. The other side of the lake was the region of the Decapolis, the 10 cities. This was largely enemy territory to Israel. These were pagan people. There was a tradition about the other side in Jesus' day. In the Hebrew Scriptures, God has promised to drive the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, the Termites out of the Promised Land. They were known as the 7 nations of Canaan that God overthrew, and He gave their land to His people as an inheritance. Now, rabbinic tradition in Jesus' day said that the Decapolis, the other side, is where the 7 nations of Canaan had settled. That area was filled with pagan temples. Some of them are still being excavated, and they featured exaltations of violence or sexuality or greed that was everything Israel was not. The pig, the most unclean animal in Israel, was regarded as sacred and used in worship on the other side. The Decapolis was also a center of Roman power. It housed a legion of 6,000 Roman soldiers. So the Israelites regarded the other side as an evil place. It was dark, oppressive, demonic. Nobody goes to the other side. Especially no rabbi ever goes to the other side. Except this one rabbi, Jesus, who just casually suggests one day, let's go to the other side. What is he doing? Doesn't he know that the kingdom is for our side? It's almost like he thinks that the other side is his side. It's almost like he thinks that every side belongs to him, or that he belongs to every side. It's almost like he thinks that all the peoples of the earth are going to be blessed now through him. Let's go over to the other side, he says. Now, the disciples are not happy about this, but they go. The large crowds that the disciples have grown used to on their side are absent. The reception committee on the other side is a single deranged, tormented, tomb-dwelling, self-mutilating demoniac. So disruptive, he's been thrown out of his own community. He falls on his knees before Jesus. What do you want with me? In God's name, don't torture me. Jesus says to the evil spirit, what is your name? And the response is legion, for we are many. Now, legion is a loaded word in this story. There's a legion of foreign soldiers, and that word is a reminder of enemies all around. They asked to be sent into pigs, which would then rush to their destruction. Now, this would read real differently in Jesus' day than it would in our day when we think about the 3 little pigs from Shrek. Any Israelite would think of the story recorded in 1 Maccabees about how Jewish patriots were forced by Rome to eat the flesh of pigs, and when they resisted, they were slaughtered. Now, the people's response to this miracle is fascinating. We're told that those tending the pigs ran off and reported this widely. The people on the other side come over to see what's happened, and they see this crazy man dressed and in his right mind. They do not respond to this miracle like those in Galilee or Jerusalem. They don't start bringing Jesus their sick children or their crippled friends. They beg Jesus to go away. Why? Well, because Jesus clearly has power, but he's not one of them. He's from the wrong side. They're afraid. Jesus agrees to go. The man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him, but Jesus says, no, stay here. Go tell your story. You can imagine this man's feelings when that boat rows away and he's not in it. But he does what Jesus asks. He tells people, and the people in Decapolis were amazed. Now here's the rest of the story. Jesus returns to the other side 2 chapters later, and this time great crowds come to see him. They ran throughout that whole region, and they carried their sick on mats to wherever they heard Jesus was. And everywhere Jesus went, villages, town, countryside, they placed their sick. They begged Jesus to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, we're told. In other words, the 7 nations of Canaan are praising the God of Israel. People were more receptive to Jesus here on the other side than any other place he'd ever gone, because they heard that this Jesus cared about people on their side. Now, this theme of Jesus loving the other side goes on just beneath the surface, all over the place in the New Testament. It's also part of what might be called the dueling crowd feeding stories. In Mark 6, Jesus feeds a big crowd on Israel's side of the lake. In Mark 8, Jesus feeds a crowd on the other side, and 7 baskets of food get left over. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, good news is coming for the 12 tribes, but good news is also coming for the 7 nations of Canaan. 12 tribes, 7 nations. It's good news for this side and good news for the other side. Now, whose side am I on? Whose side are you on? Love of enemies, love for the other, is perhaps Jesus' teaching that is most famous, but also most violated. We human beings are side takers. We all tend to divide the human race up into us versus them. And this sadly goes on often for religious reasons, even in the church. But it can also happen for ethnicity or culture or language. 2 of the most powerful words in the human race are us and them. All kinds of research around this. If somebody is in my group, I will tend to magnify their good qualities and overlook their negative qualities. If somebody's in the out group, somebody's them, I do the opposite. I look for the bad and overlook the good. In a classic study, researchers divided a group of boys at a camp into Group W and Group X, just to look at the power of us versus them. They would take one kid, give him a little bit of money, and then tell him he was going to have to divide it up between 2 boys from 2 different groups. You will give some of your money to this boy from Group X, and then give some to this boy from Group W. And the plan was to get an initial read, a baseline, and then introduce some antagonism between the 2 groups and see how much antagonism was needed before kids started giving more money to the boy in their group. They could not even get a baseline reading. Researchers were stunned. They said their clearest finding is that boys will discriminate against other boys as soon as they are randomly assigned to a different group. And by the way, if you're thinking girls would do any better at this, it's because you are a girl and you're assuming your in-group is superior, and that just confirms the core idea. But Jesus seems to have regarded himself as the man for all sides. Now, his followers often then and often now collapse back into us versus them. Those of us who follow Jesus have not just struggled with making non-Christians into them. We sometimes do it with each other. There's a guy named Emo Phillips that tells this story. A man's walking along the Golden Gate Bridge one day when he sees a woman standing by herself feeling lonely. He ran up to tell her God loves her. A tear came to her eye. And then he asked her, are you a Christian maybe, or a Jew, Hindu, what? She said, I'm a Christian. He said, me too. Small world. Protestant or Catholic? Protestant. Me too, he said. What denomination? She says, Baptist. Me too, he says. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist? Northern Baptist, she says. Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist? Northern Conservative Baptist. That's amazing, he says. Me too. Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist or Northern Conservative Reformed Baptist? She says, Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist. Remarkable. Me also. Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist Eastern region? She says, Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist Great Lakes region. A miracle, he said. Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. She said, Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. He shouted, die, heretic, and pushed her over the rail. We're kind of that way, us and them. And this goes way, way, way back. And it's something about Jesus and the way that he taught, the way that he was the man for all sides, the way that nobody was a them, but to Jesus, everybody was us, that changed the world. One day, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus wanted to stop in a Samaritan village, but it wasn't welcoming. They were Samaritans. And his disciples asked him, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy them? They thought Jesus would be pleased by this offer. We're going to take a stand, boy. We're going to be on Jesus' side. Jesus' followers sometimes do this kind of thing. But Jesus turns and admonishes them. He is protecting the Samaritans and rebuking his own followers. What an odd little story. In fact, the New Testament is full of these odd little Samaritan stories. Jesus befriends a 5 times married Samaritan woman, and she becomes a great evangelist of his. He heals 10 lepers, and only the Samaritan returns to thank him. He tells a story about an Israelite, a priest, a Levite, and a Samaritan, and the hero is the Samaritan. He treats people on the other side like they were people on his side, on our side. He doesn't just love us, he seems to love Samaritans. And not just them. There is a saying in The Godfather, a movie whose title, ironically, is one more reminder of the life of Jesus. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. With an entirely different meaning, they are perhaps words from the heart of God that Jesus proclaimed to the world. Conan the Barbarian, now there's a movie whose title does not come from Jesus, was actually paraphrasing Genghis Khan when he gave his famous answer to the question, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, to see them driven before you and hear the lamentations of their women. But an alternative idea came from Galilee. What is best in life? To love your enemies and see them reconciled to you. Now see, this is not a popular idea in the ancient world. There's a monograph on this that summarizes the whole mindset in the ancient world simply by this: helping friends and hurting enemies. When Jesus was approached by soldiers to be arrested and killed, Peter picked up a sword and cut off the ear of a man named Malchus. Jesus told Peter to put the sword away. He picks up the ear and puts it back on Malchus's head. Just imagine the dialogue. Jesus saying to the guy, I'm sorry about my disciple Peter. I've been working on it for 3 years. I haven't gotten very far. I apologize about the ear thing. Imagine when Malchus got home for dinner that night, his wife asked, how'd work go today? Well, my ear got cut off, but the weirdest thing happened. The guy that I came to have crucified healed me. Why would he heal me? And this odd little story about Jesus healing an enemy was regarded as so important that it was included in all 4 Gospels. Dale Bruner put it like this: Jesus' enemies are not his only problem. Jesus' overzealous followers have historically been as painful to him. It's like for Jesus, the categories break down like this. Not us versus them. It's the perfect and the not perfect. It's the holy and the sinful, which puts all of humanity on the same side, the wrong side, the other side. But it's like Jesus was determined to make that side his side. And this changed the way that people thought about humanity. The teachings of Jesus to love enemies, to forgive, to pursue reconciliation, which were so counter to life in the ancient Roman world. They said things like, help your friends but hurt your enemies. These teachings inspired a writer named Tolstoy, who wrote a book called Resurrection that was actually banned in Russia, but inspired a British-trained lawyer to start a Tolstoyan community in South Africa. In fact, the last full letter that Tolstoy ever wrote to a non-relative was a letter he wrote to this lawyer to praise the self-sacrificing, enemy-loving approach of Jesus. And that lawyer's name was Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi eventually went back to India and did not become a Christian, but there is no way to understand the movement Gandhi fostered apart from the Sermon on the Mount and the suffering love of Jesus. Jesus' teachings and Gandhi's strategies, in turn, inspired a man named Martin Luther King, who gave what was perhaps the most well-known American speech of the 20th century, I have a dream about one day when all sides would be one side. But I want to return to Mary and O'Shea. How did a mom of an only child end up living next door to the man who took her child's life? After her son died, Mary tried to say all the right things. She was part of a church, and she said at the trial that she forgave her son's killer. But as time passed, it became clear she had not forgiven. Bitterness and resentment just kind of ate away at her heart like a cancer. The church didn't help a whole lot. After her son's death, her pastor actually told her that the reason her son had been killed was that Mary did not pray enough. So she left that church. But she couldn't leave her pain. And people around her would sometimes tell her, it's time to move on, to let go of the past. Aren't you over that yet? One pivotal moment came when she stumbled on a poem in which two women meet in heaven. They can tell from their crowns that each was a mother, and they want to know each other's story. One of them says, I would have taken my son's place on the cross. Oh, you're the mother of Christ, said the other mother, falling to her knees. Kissing a tear away, the first mother said, tell me who your son is, that I may grieve with you also. My son is Judas Iscariot. Now, when Mary heard that poem, it wiped her out. It was the beginning of a journey. After 12 years, Mary decided that in order to be free, she would need to meet with the one who had inflicted this pain on her to see if she had really forgiven him. The Department of Corrections personnel actually warned her, you will not see the 16-year-old boy who shot your son. He has been in prison for 12 years. He is a man now. Prison life has molded him for more than a decade. Still, Mary said, she's got to try. They approached O'Shea, and initially he was not interested. Why should I meet with this woman? She'll just want to hurt me. She'll just want to blame me, he thought. Mary waited 9 months. She approached the officials, who asked O'Shea again. Something had been at work in his mind. He said yes. Mary began that first conversation with O'Shea with a carefully prepared thought. I don't know you, you don't know me. Let's just start there. And the idea that she wanted to know him before judging him loosened something in his spirit. And he decided that he would try. And they talked for hours that first time. By the end of the first interview, O'Shea asked Mary, whose son he had killed, if he could hug her. And she said yes. And when he put his arms around her, something inside her burst, and she began to weep. She began to sob. O'Shea said immediately he had second thoughts about the hug. What he said to me was, I'd been in prison for 12 years around hardened criminals, but this was the scariest moment of my life, this woman sobbing in my arms. But from that moment, a bond started to form between them. Mary would visit and they would talk. Now, she had to be willing to understand his side of what happened. He had to be willing to see what he had robbed her of. In December of 2009, O'Shea was released, and Mary decided that she would throw him a welcome out party. She asked some nuns who lived near her to help. They were known locally as the Sisters in the Hood. And Mary's landlord had an idea. He said, "Mary, what if you were to invite O'Shea to live here in this apartment building, in the apartment next to you?" "He would never do that," Mary said. "But what if you asked?" She did. And now O'Shea lives a door jam away. He goes to school and works a job. And sometimes O'Shea says, when I'm down, when I'm discouraged, when things aren't working, I look at Mary's face and I say, "Hey, she gave me another chance. I need to give me another chance." Where did this idea of giving somebody another chance come from? You know, sometimes we talk about forgiveness as a tool for a person that's been hurt by pain. And it is that, but it's more than that. O'Shea and Mary have given each other gifts that neither would ever have known without the miracle of forgiveness. Jesus' life and teaching about forgiving and loving enemies changed the world. And I wonder how that one might change you. There will be somebody in your life who is a difficult person. There is somebody that rubs you the wrong way, that's hard for you to be around. There's somebody in your past where resentment or bitterness is still brooding. What would it be like this week if you were to take that to this Jesus? If you were to say, you know, I understand that this kind of miracle of forgiveness could happen between Mary and O'Shea. Could it happen for me? What's the next step that you might want to take, that you could ask God for help in? To make a phone call, to write a note, to let it go. He is still in the miracle of forgiving business.